Good afternoon and welcome to a brand spanking news segment, rather obviously titled In Conversation With, a segment specially designed to showcase the backstories of individuals who have made an impact. During this hour, we will delve into a conversation around stories that need to be told of modern day icons. Luminary Learning Solutions have crafted this segment so you, our audience, can be inspired to truly thrive. Well, I'm Anton Thayalan, the Chief Evangelist and Co Host this hour. Joining me is our founder and destiny architect, Vidusha Nathavitharana, the host for this afternoon. For today's segment of In Conversation With, it is my privilege to introduce Paul McCarthy, CEO of Chief Fire Officer, speaker and facilitator, positive disruptor, and a corporate rebel at Fired Leadership. And we will get to hear about that in a little while. A little bit about Paul. He has operated for almost 25 years at senior level within global consulting firms and helped to develop these firms. Paul has led and delivered substantial business global transformation initiatives for over 100 clients, including BP, Deloitte, KPMG, National Health Service, PepsiCo, to name a few. He has coached and developed over 100 leaders, and he is on a mission to address leadership dysfunction and hypocrisy. He was accused of asking too many questions, and now let's get him to answer a few for us. On that note, hey Paul, good afternoon and welcome to the show.
Anton, thank you. It's a privilege to be here. I'm honoured, and Vidusha also likewise. I'm really looking forward to a stimulating and refreshing and controversial and different conversation. So thank you for inviting me on, and I'm all yours.
Oh, absolute pleasure. So I'm not going to waste time, right? And this is hot. So I'm going to dive right into dangerous waters here with you. And I want to address the elephant in the room, so to speak. Question for you, Paul, and I know this for a fact that you were fired as a senior director or a senior level position. Question is, why were you fired? What went wrong, or rather, what did go right because of that?
Great question, love it. Well, quite frankly, Anton and Vidusha, I was fired for being the leader that I was hired to be. And what do I mean by that? Well, in the corporate world, there are numerous interviews that one goes through as a leader in order to receive the job offer. And so on average, between 6 and 8 interviews for a leadership position at the senior and executive level. And all the way through the interview process, even before the interview process started, I would demonstrate and display the types of traits that I have as a leader. And those were encouraged. In fact, those were expected for me in my leadership roles. So I went through the numerous processes of the first round interview, second round, case study, coaching, working with some people at peer level, as well as those that I would report to, that would report to me. And at every stage, it was encouraged to be the type of leader that I was saying I was. And then what happened was I actually was given, the job. And once I started actually leading the way I explained I would lead, what I found, to my surprise, and actually let me just state for the listeners here, the viewers, I wanted to be the leader that fitted in. I wanted to be that leader that drank the Kool-Aid. I was naive, I'm in my late 40s now, and I've had a series of leadership roles over my career in many different organizations, as I'm sure we'll discuss in terms of size and scope. But I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be that leader. I didn't know that I was about to step on to these things that I uncovered. So when I started being a leader, as I displayed the traits of in the interview process, I found that I asked too many questions. I found that, I was encouraged to challenge the status quo, but then when I did as a leader, my wrists were slapped. My card was marked. And what I mean by that is because I exposed the dysfunction of leadership at a lot of these companies that I've worked for, people didn't like that. I stepped on egos. I challenged things too much. I was too expressive. I was the person that when you're in a boardroom and everybody's sitting around and they're saying, well, who's going to do this and who's going to do that when you leave the room? Everybody would nod and say yes, and no one would do anything. And it was almost like a culture of fear, leadership groupthink. And really what I was highlighting with my bosses, the partners, people above me, as well as those around me, was that I was exposing the hypocrisy of leadership. Nobody wants to talk about it. And in fact, you talk about the elephant in the room. It was like this subject. It was a known amongst many, but not discussed amongst any. And so I was fired really for highlighting a broken system that, quite frankly, a lot of organizations and those that provide leadership development for leaders are benefiting from as well. And so I'm actually really glad that I was fired, and it took me a long time of cathartic reflection and rumination to figure out that I was not the common. Well, I was the common denominator, but what I was doing in every organization that's fired me was highlighting the issues that they did not want to address. And so we'll get onto this, but I've made it my mission since to actually write a book and develop a brand around this whole concept of what I believe is key to future leadership.
Can I just weigh in there? I mean, I'm glad that it worked out, but when it does happen, it can be quite awful, isn't it? I mean, getting fired at a junior position is one thing, but getting fired at a senior level must make you reflect and ask the question, look, is it really me? Did that happen, or and what were your reflections on that?
Yeah, great question. And I think we're all human, so we're naturally going to feel a bit hurt. Our ego is going to be a little bit bruised, and we are going to think it was just all of our fault. If you go to any bookstore, I mean, maybe it's different in COVID now, but if you look at any, on Amazon, if you look at books about being fired, typically what you'll see are books that say, there, never mind, it was a bad experience, you'll get over it, here are the tips to help you get back into work. You'll find through my reflections and what I'm doing, I'm celebrating the fact that I was fired. But were there moments where I thought, if I could just fit in, it would be so much easier? Because it would have been, as I said, I wanted to drink the Kool-Aid, but I couldn't stand by and watch the hypocrisy, the ego-based leadership, the dysfunction, and the incredible people are oblivious to it, or because we play the political game and we don't want to upset the apple cart. But yeah, there were times where, Vidusha, I reflected and I said, well, maybe I could just tone down my approach here. If someone wants me to ask too many questions, they're telling me they want me to be innovative. And when I tried to be innovative, I realized I stepped on the toes of people that were supposed to be innovative as well. And it was embarrassing for them. And, when our egos are fragile at the best of times. And so, I wondered, should I just fit in? And, after I had those moments of reflection, I realized that I have to be congruent with who I am in terms of my values and how I show up. And so for me, I couldn't ignore that feeling, which was not that there was an injustice that I was fired, and it was, and it's embarrassing and it's almost shameful. I mean, I have friends and family that they know who they are, that they think I'm just a troublemaker and that I've just been fired for being a troublemaker. And they want me to just get back, out of the, not to take this out into the world and just be okay with the way that things were, because that's how culture operates in organizations. I don't agree. And so, when I moved from being quite sad and upset and reflective and thinking it must be all my fault, my job as part of being a leader in consulting in what I've done is to look at leadership development trends and what's on the horizon, and look at ongoing disruption and how we need to equip our leaders to handle those things. In fact, to embrace those things. And I realized that we weren't developing the traits that leaders need for the future. And that's where I made the connection that actually the things that I believe I've been fired for are the very things that can augment the way we develop future talent. So then my mission became quite different. So actually being fired has been something that's far from upsetting, actually. It's quite celebratory. But there were moments, Vidusha, where I sat in a dark room and I thought it must be all my fault, and that can have a real impact on your strength of character. And people start to move away from you. I remember, just briefly, and then we can go on to the next question, but again, these people know who they are. The guilty shall remain nameless. But they're sitting in airport lounges and people sitting opposite me, because in Canada and North America, it's typical to be on a plane, to fly 3 or 4 days a week to clients and all this. And I remember this person that I was very, very close with in a business development capacity in one of the firms that I was in. We have a UK term, we were thick as thieves, as it were. We were really close. And as soon as I was fired, this individual took me off LinkedIn, wasn't connected with me anymore. And then I saw this individual sitting opposite me in the airport lounge one night, going somewhere. I think I was going to Toronto. They were going to the west of the country. And they knew, they saw me, but they looked down. They didn't want to look at me. And that got me thinking about this whole topic as well, because it's a social taboo. We talk about the elephant in the room, but being fired is a sacrilegious concept. Nobody wants to talk about it. And I do. So, for those people out there, they know who they are, and others that have crossed my path and then kind of moved away because I've been fired, what I really want to do is help people like that and others to change the narrative about why we fire top talent, and to expose everything I've mentioned so far and will do in subsequent conversations with you and in the book and everything I do. But yeah, that's a long way of answering your question. But yeah, getting fired was a milestone in my life.
Interesting comment on the fact that, was it my fault? And Vidusha and I have this conversation where we always say something goes wrong, it's got to be our fault because we've failed to do something right. But just to sort of understand the context on this, have you always been the kind of person who questions the status quo? Have you always been the person who keeps questioning everything? Or is it just something that you developed when you got into the corporate life and when you got into the senior roles?
Can I just interject and throw one in there before you answer it, Paul? Were you like that in school as well? Because school would have been a lot more harsher than the corporate world, especially if you ask too many questions, especially if you went to the kind of schools that we went to. You sit there silently. So you were clearly not taught well enough to keep silent.
Yeah, so I'll answer those two questions. I think with I'll take you back to my life, my early life. I often say I'm a poor boy from Shepherd's Bush. So for the viewers, listeners who don't know what that is, Shepherd's Bush is think of the most impoverished part of Sri Lanka. Think of wherever you're listening or looking at this from. Think of the most impoverished part of where you either grew up or the areas that you stayed away from in the daytime or the nighttime because it wasn't safe. Well, I came from one of those areas. So all of my peers, all of the people around me were either drug dealers. There was a lot of crime. There was a lot of misery. And I came from not so functional a family actually as well. And so when you come from those environments, nothing's really expected of you. You are expected to just bumble along life and just be gracious for whatever you get given. And so I should have been like many of my brothers and sisters in Shepherd's Bush and places around the world as we speak. We should be statistics. Like, we shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here talking with you right now. I should be dead. I should be in a prison. I should be a drug dealer. I should be all those things. But I realized that, I'm 46. I realized at about, 9 or 10 years old that I had a brain. And it's plagued me ever since, if I'm honest, because I think quite differently from people. And I have always asked why. When someone says why, I say, why not? And when you come from a position where nothing's expected of you, quite frankly, guys, every day above ground is a good day. And so I started to think to myself, well, you know what? I'm going to try and make something in my life. I'm going to kind of use my intellect and move around and move through life. And I'm from a poor environment, so working class environment. In the UK growing up, you had working class, middle class, upper class, and I was at the bottom of the barrel. And so I remember, I went to a Catholic school, and so for anyone that's Catholic out there, it's a hard experience to go to a Catholic school. And I remember at 11 years old, and this is in my book actually, and subsequent things I do and talk about. I remember being in religion, and religion was mandatory as a class. You had to go to it. And the teacher was talking about Catholicism and everything like that. And I said, when are we going to learn? His name is Mr. Doyle, lovely guy, probably dead now, but lovely guy. When are we going to learn about other religions other than Catholicism? And the answer I got was, son, there is no other religion than Catholicism. And when I refused to accept that, I was then thrown out of the class and sent to the headmaster's office, where I was, upon talking to the headmaster, asked the same question, and I repeated the same answer. And so I learned at a young age that I had something inside me that wanted to challenge the status quo, but not because I wanted to be a disturber and just with no purpose. I wanted to improve things. I wanted to understand things. And I then went on to do very many different things. I studied anthropology because I was fascinated by different cultures and how we do things, because that enables us to understand who we are. So I then got a reputation in management consulting and leadership development and coaching and transformation as what we call a reframer. So before I went into management consulting, I did a master's degree. I was sponsored by a very prestigious social fund, European social fund, to complete a master's degree. And I was one of 5 people out of 2,000 that got this sponsorship to do a master's degree, and I had to write a 30,000-word thesis. I was in my early 20s, and I decided to write about the way that gay couples organize their financial arrangements in their household. Now, this was for the viewers, listeners, this was the mid-90s, and so nobody was talking about that subject. And also, I used the internet for my research method. Nobody was using the internet. In fact, nobody knew really what the internet was. And so my point of all this is that throughout my whole life, in every aspect of what I've done, I've taken a concept and I have reframed it. I have made it so clear for people to see the paradigms that we operate in and to help them shift their perspective on certain things. And I've got into trouble for it, and I'm, as I said earlier, sometimes I feel it was all my fault, and I reflected on it, and then I looked at the deeper reasons, but that's happened in every aspect of my life. So, have I always been like that? Yeah, I think I have, because I've always wanted to improve and enhance things, and it can come across in a way that I'm disrupting and I'm making people look silly and highlighting their fragility and lack of competence. But if we think about a higher evolutionary purpose and what we're all here for, that's what I'm really trying to do, is get everybody aligned around a core purpose. And we all know what we're doing in relation to achieving that. And unfortunately, life and the fragility of the human condition means that we look at things from an ego-based perspective. And it's quite difficult. We all do it. And so that's, I think, you take me down a path to answer these questions, and I go quite a long way. So tell me if this helps you, if it doesn't.
No, it absolutely does. And I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, and I sincerely hope people can hear my wishful sarcasm in it as well. It is your fault. You clearly are not the norm, and anyone who's not the norm will. I'm slap in the wrist is a mild way of saying it, but even in our part of the world, I'm very familiar with this, Paul, and I'm guilty as charged of being that. And sometimes you say it very nicely, and I believe you when you say that you were not looking to make trouble in that sense. And I'm guilty as charged for actually sometimes looking to make just the trouble that I knew I would get into, just to provoke it. Just to say.
Yeah, but you know, if you think about, again, who's listening to this conversation as well, like when we think about leaders in history, and we even write books about them, like Steve Jobs, Winston Churchill, you know, leaders like that, we treated as pariahs, and we, you know, they disrupted things. But had they not have done what they have done, and by the way, I'm not comparing myself to anyone like that, of course, but the way they were seen in organizations or by the country, they were seen in a different way, and when they achieved what they achieved, everybody thanked them. Like, we wouldn't, if it wasn't for Steve Jobs, and by the way, I don't think he was a very nice man. He was a very intellectual genius, but he wasn't a nice man. Let's not forget that.
Sure.
But had it not been for him, we would not be having iPods, the iPhone, the MacBook Pro. These are all part of our common vernacular now. Had it not been for Winston Churchill, again, not a nice man, an alcoholic, a misogynist, but a very intelligent man. Had it not been for him, and by the way, for anyone that's not aware of that story, he actually deposed Neville Chamberlain, who was the Prime Minister of the UK, who actually wanted to develop a relationship with Hitler, and Hitler was actually duping him. So Churchill usurped Chamberlain, and his style was very rough around the edges. But had it not been for him and his efforts in the war, I don't know how much of Europe would have been under the control of Nazi occupation. We don't like these leaders, but they have moved our ability to disrupt forward at exponential pace. And so we don't like them. It's like the whistleblower. Nobody likes the whistleblower when they're blowing the whistle on some illegal, immoral practices. But after the whistleblower has blown the whistle, we change the law, the legislation changes, policy amends, and all of a sudden we thank the whistleblower. Why can't we have a conversation about that? Changing the narrative about how disruptors turn up.
Sorry,
no, absolutely. And
go ahead, V.
No, I just have one follow-up on that, and you will hear the frogs croak now. I did warn you on this.
That's so calming. So calming.
So here we go. So what I wanted to kind of ask was, when you do that inside an organization, it's quite a different thing, because organizations expect the senior management team to toe the line and kind of not upset the apple cart. But I think it suits you perfectly when you're on the other side of the fence looking in as a consultant, because consultants are expected to do that on behalf of the organization. Having said that, 9 times out of 10, even as a consultant, when you walk into the organization, there's a certain decorum, an unwritten norm that expects you to toe the line to a certain extent. So I want to ask you about that side of what you do. Is it easier to be a consultant and to poke at the status quo, or is it still a laborious task?
So is it easier to to toe the line, or is it easier to be that disruptor as a consultant? Well, first, my caveat for answering this question is really that whether I'm a leader in an organization helping to grow that organization, or whether I'm a consultant as a representative of that organization going out to a client to help that client, shouldn't we all be basing our help and support on the ability to have honest conversations? Shouldn't we be looking at helping our organization that we're growing, or helping our clients that we're supporting? And by the way, they're paying us a handsome fee for supporting them. Shouldn't we approach that from honesty and integrity and without an agenda? right? So that's the kind of the ground, the foundation for this. So I have been the consultant that's gone into clients and, you know, many household names around the world, and some not so known by viewers and listeners. And I find the same pattern always happens. A client hires me to do X. They agree to pay me Y. The scope is A, B, and C. And then we get along and start the work. At some point in that journey, what happens is that the leadership team in the client disband. They are not aligned around a vision. They said they were, but they're not. And then when we highlight, as if it's me or the team that I'm working with, we highlight the fact that we need to get people aligned around a vision, then that's when the trouble starts. So I'm hired to provide a service as a consultant, but many clients don't want to hear the truth. Many clients I've worked with at the C-suite level, and I've probably developed this as well for lots of these clients. You go into the office and you see the one-page laminate strategy map, the value statements. You know, we've all seen it. You lead with integrity, transparency, open door policy. Then we see the books that they have. They probably have a lot of leadership and management books from the established gurus or self-styled gurus. And then we see the way they lead. And there's a complete incongruence between all of those three things. And so the reason I'm telling you this is because I go into an organization, and maybe I'm naive, but I'm 25 years in, hundreds of clients, work with hundreds of leaders, but I always expect people to practice what they preach, do what it says on the tin, as we said. So if you hire me to do a project and you pay me a couple of $100,000, I'm assuming that when you bring me in, that you are already in a position to embark on that project. But then what I find, to your question about is it easier to poke as a consultant, what I find is I have to navigate the political landscape within the different leadership levels, the management team. Bob doesn't talk to Sheila doesn't talk to Andrew, and it's all because they want to tightly control the money that they've got for the resources they need for their projects. But they're all supposed to be working to an aligned vision for the organization that's based upon this one-page thing that sits in on the wall of every of their offices. And so when I find that I do that, as an independent, it's less of an issue. But when I've worked with the more established consulting firms, they don't want that, because they want the sell-on, they want the cross-sell. They don't want to challenge the client too much because they want the invoice paid. One client I had, and it will remain nameless, from one major consulting firm that will remain nameless, I went in to do an organizational review of their organizational structure and look at efficiencies and effectiveness. And so how could we get this organization operating more seamlessly? And I found a bunch of things that I needed as a consultant. I have a code of ethics. We're regulated in the industry of consulting. It's my duty to tell you, my client, the honest truth about what I've found. And yeah, we do it in a professional and courteous, respectful way, always. In those big consulting firms and some boutiques, you have to go up the chain of command in that organization to make sure that people are okay with the language you're using. In fact, this consulting firm in particular has a software that you put your deliverables into, and it will spit out the types of words that may cause controversy. And by the way, what I mean controversy, the words that if the client uses, let's say I say there's 5 recommendations that I want you to do as a consultant. You take the 5 recommendations, you move forward with them. If one of those recommendations loses you money as an organization, you can actually technically sue me as a consultant with those big firms. So they have this software that actually identifies the words that are more likely to get you into a litigation with that client. And then we're told in no uncertain terms, remove those words because we don't want to get into litigation. Now, I ask you, how is that being honest? How is that being service orientated to your clients? So you ask me, is it easy to poke or to kind of highlight this stuff as a consultant? No, it's not, because when you do, you're slapped on the wrists. Now, and the irony is that the older I get and the more gray hair I get and the more I work independently, people value honest, authentic and truth-telling. I position myself as a critical friend to my clients, which means I have to be honest. Like, it's like when you have a baby, and a lot of babies are very cute. Some babies are not so cute. And when you're asked the question, do you think my baby's good looking? Why is it we never answer the truth? Why is it we always say, oh, it's cute, but we're deep inside, we're thinking, he's an ugly little boy. I'm sure he'll grow up to be very handsome. But he's not he looks like a cabbage, like the head of a cabbage. But you can't say that because it's against social and societal norms. But to the beginning of my answer to this question, what about if we could have honesty in the way we have conversations? What about, and that's what I tend to do. The older I get, the more experienced. I go into the C-suite, I go into clients, and I say, listen, I don't want to take your money if you're not going to be serious about doing anything that makes a change with this project. And in fact, I used to say to clients, look, I'm fed up of putting reports together that you pay me a few $100,000 for, and they just sit on a shelf gathering dust. So, I think we need to reintroduce honesty into our conversations in both organizations and with our clients. And I think until we do that, it's going to be quite difficult to keep pushing our clients forward.
I couldn't agree.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I hear you, right? When you turn around and talk about the different kind of leaders were not so great. Okay, and I guess we can go right back to the days of Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, even Gandhi, for that matter, to the modern day Elon Musk, Zuckerberg of FB. But why is it that despite all the negativity that they have, despite all the wrong things that they do, they're looked at much differently, that they're given the recognition and the fame? People are willing to overlook the negativity, but to only hold on to the positive, although the positive things may be few, but they hold on to that, right? You mentioned Winston Churchill as well. But why is it in the corporate world, as a consultant or as an employee, when a leader tries to point out things like that, all the good things done by the leader is overlooked, and the leadership or the management or the board only holds on to that negative bit and sort of hang the individual? Why does that happen? Is it because we are more enlightened? What's the difference?
And can I just throw a small comma in there and ask this also? Ultimately, history remembers the victorious, isn't it? And all sins are forgiven at that point. And I think that's true of Churchill, that's true of anybody. Civilizations are written by it. So in that context also, I just want to ask you, Paul, how do you rectify that and reckon with it, so to say, in the kind of work you do? Because you clearly are going against the tide, so to say, on it, in what you practice, what you preach, and what you work with. So how do you contend with that?
Or am I going against the tide? Or am I going with the tide? Because, as we all know, if you go against the tide, it's a challenging experience for you. I would say that what I'm doing is I'm highlighting things that people want to talk about but are fearful of talking about. Like, if you want to find out the state of the leadership in your organization and how effective it is, just be a fly on the water cooler wall and listen to the conversations that are happening. And so, I think a lot of this comes down to culture, the organizational and the leadership culture. We don't actually celebrate diversity in leadership and in styles and divergent thinking. We don't encourage leaders to fail. We expect leaders have the answers, all the answers. And so, I believe that and there's a big growing there's a growing movement of kind of failing forwards, failing fast, learning from failures, because actually it's from our greatest failures that we surface and our greatest strengths come out. So I think there's an area around the culture that we need to address. We need to have an honest discussion about culture. Amy Edmondson of Harvard Business Review talks about we need that kind of fertile soil in place, which basically means we have to lay the foundation for our ability to have honest conversations. And we have to be, she pioneered work in the whole field of psychological safety. And to be psychologically safe as an employee or a leader, you have to have the culture support that concept. Anton, to your question, I might come back and get some clarification from you as well, because what I'm hearing, and I might be wrong in this, is you're trying to understand why are leaders that do question things hung out to dry, or are you saying leaders that do bad things, they're not remembered for those bad things, they're remembered for their good things? Is that which path are you going down there?
The latter.
So they do bad things, but they're remembered for the goodness.
Well, I guess a bit of both, right? Because my concern is, as a leader, your job, and you're right. So just going back in time to your experience and what you started out with, you project all the right characteristics at the interview. You answer all the questions, you display and demonstrate exactly what the leadership wants, because obviously they have a vision for the organization. Nobody's questioning that. So you come in there and obviously not there to cause trouble, but keeping that vision in mind, and you want to support the organization, you go in and put things into place. But clearly being vociferous and challenging the status quo is now not being looked upon favorably. And that gets highlighted and you get penalized for it. And that's the highlight, right? Because if you look at your experience of the airport scenario, etc., once you go down the road, everything about you becomes negative. Whereas the great leaders that we read about, that we talk about, that we quote in presentations, in pitches and all of that, really never walk the talk either, because they all have their negatives. They've all had their wrong habits, and some of them I guess I can't even bring it up on air, but you can read about it on the internet, but no one ever brings that up. But it's strange, isn't it, that those kind of leaders are looked up to and still talked about and still referred to, whereas the leaders in today's context, when they challenge the status quo, when they highlight things, they're frowned upon and even kicked out. What's the difference? I don't know. Vidusha, I mean, am I making sense, or is it?
No. I'm gonna kind of reel that back and kind of reconceptualize it for a moment, right? Is it down to power pole? So when you're right at the top, the rule book is different. When you are somewhere in the middle, the rule book is different. And when you're lower down the rung, the rule book is different. Is that what it amounts to?
Well, power and accountability and playing the political game are key. So if you, I mean, every piece of peer-reviewed research that I've read about the politics and playing the political game in an organization as a leader starts off with an acknowledgement that we need to play the political game, but we have a disdain for it, but we need to play it to get ahead. And my question is why? Why do we need to play the game when we clearly do not enjoy it? And it clearly leads to mental, emotional, psychological abuse in our leaders, our management team, our frontline workers. I think power
as well, isn't it?
Repeat that.
And the entire process is suboptimal anyway.
Yeah. What would happen if we took the concept of power out of that? What would happen if we really had a flat organization? In fact, what would happen if we removed the organizational hierarchy and the structures and the reporting lines, and we showed up as human-based talent? So leaders, the leaders that we seem to revere even though they've done bad things. Why is that? There's an expectation that I think as a leader, you've earned that position, and so at the end of the day, we're all humans. So some of the best ideas can come from people in non-leadership roles. Honestly, when I think about this subject, I mean, let's take one clearly controversial person that you mentioned, and I'll probably get all my accounts hacked and closed down because of this. But Mark Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg was clearly aware of Cambridge Analytica's immoral, unethical, and illegal activities to sway voters to vote certain ways politically in various countries around the world. They were at the forefront of what I believe was convincing the British public to vote for Brexit. And yet when Mark Zuckerberg was brought to a panel to discuss this, he had no information to give that panel. I mean, if you watch the video on whatever channel you want to watch it on, he was basically excusing himself and saying he needed to get back to the team because he had no knowledge. Now I ask you, as the head of an organization that is embroiled in a scandal like that, or about to be, wouldn't you expect the CEO to be an evangelist of integrity and honesty and actually, come clean? I mean, I think about an example, a different level of leader, but I put this in my book as well. And a guy called Nick Cirillo. For those who don't know him, he's a guy who from Chicago, Illinois, and he had a series of pizza shops, Subway shops, and stuff like that. Now he expanded, I think, too quickly with his franchisees, his organizations, and he was facing a situation where one of his locations may need to close in a certain number of weeks because he couldn't pay the bills, he couldn't pay the staff, he wasn't getting the customers through the door. And so what he did against the advice of everyone, bank managers, shareholders, family, friends, everyone, was to write a public letter to every staff member and acknowledge and own the fact that he was the one responsible for putting the organization in that situation. What a commendable, brave leader. You talk about power. He absolved himself of all power. He said, I'm basically human. I did this. It was my issue. I have to take responsibility. Can you imagine if all of our leaders were like that? Or the guy that was brought in 2006 to grow Airbus, when it was competing against Boeing for market share. I think his name is Christian Streif. Now, he went through a very time-consuming interview process that culminated in him being offered a role as CEO of Airbus to basically change the way it developed its products. He was going to take one, I can't remember the specifics. I mentioned it in my book, and I'm happy to chat offline with people about it. But he wanted to relocate where they were manufacturing certain airplane parts to another location. And when he did this, it came up right with the board of directors with Airbus as a challenge, right? And so basically they ousted him after 3 months on the job. This guy was probably paid millions of whatever, millions and millions in a gagging order. Now, my question is, surely as a CEO, when he's gone through those months and months of rounds of interviews, he would have been speaking with the board and he would have told the board about his plans. And if they didn't agree at that time, why would they hire him? So do you imagine? So again, with what I'm highlighting here, and I think to Anton, your point around why do we celebrate leaders that do things that clearly are not right? This is a bigger issue. I think we have a broken system. We have a broken approach to leadership, and it all starts from our inability to have that conversation. Why aren't we having the conversation? That's what I want to know.
No, absolutely. And just to kind of probe, I am conscious of time. Bear with me. It's too interesting to stop. I'm really sorry, Paul. I often do this much to Anton's annoyance, but I'd rather kind of go a few minutes more rather than not ask the question, since I might not have get the chance to afterwards. But you're right. and sometimes the system does play a part in it, and sometimes the individual plays a part in it, and your integrity, if it holds true, like very much the examples you cited, you will hold true to those values. And of course, there is always that paradox, isn't it? Sometimes the organization doesn't allow you to be who you are, and sometimes you will be that nonetheless. On the other hand, some organizations will demand you be that, come what may, because they believe in the same principles as you do. So here's what I want to ask, because I think you've gone that full circle, and you started out in the corporate environment, gotten out of it, and now helping organizations get there and to have that honest conversation. Can I just ask you, and I'm not asking for free advice on air, so to say, but just as tips, if you don't mind, what can organizations do honestly to have an honest conversation, at least at a senior level?
Well, you know, and I don't want to promote my book at all here, but I am actually going to.
Please do. You're permitted to.
Well, you know, the reason I say that is because, and I'm going to go down a path as well that I'll come back. So allow me a few minutes to do that, if you may. Most leadership books I've ever read, and books about leadership and culture, and you know, you get to the end and you have a series of, you know, they give you 5 steps to basically, here's the 5 things you need to do. But what that means is they really want you to approach them for their services, because they're writing a book to basically get business out of you, right? So they books are typically structured. Here's the problem, part 1. Here's my solution, part 2. And here's a high level of what I would do to address the problem in part 1 with my approach in part 2. But if you want more, you have to come to me and I'll give you the service, and I'll charge you a lot of money. What I've decided in my book, because I've read hundreds and hundreds of leadership books, and it's the same trajectory every time, from the emerging thought leaders to the big names that we know out there that sit on leaders' bookshelves. They do it the same thing. They give you a high level condensed version of how to put this into effect in your organization. I've decided to give away about $2.5 to $3 million of consulting in the 3rd section of my book by giving the reader the answer. Now, I'm not being prescriptive in it, but I break it down and say there's three stages: creating the foundation and the environment, getting that environment up and running, and sustaining it. And each of those 3 stages, I basically developed a roadmap of activities that I would recommend an organization's leadership team would address if they want to move forward with the things that I'm espousing. And as I said, I'm giving this away because I actually think my philosophy about working as a consultant is that I want my clients to do this for themselves. I want to help create a condition, the environment where I can help develop their capability, and then they don't need me anymore, right? So in the book, I give all of these suggested activities because I want that with organizations. I don't want to create a long-lasting dependency. Now, of course, I'd love to get opportunities with clients to help them, you know, and I love what I do. But I want to develop an ecosystem where fired leadership is basically something in our vernacular in future leadership development. That means I want to basically hit about 1 million people around the world where I don't have that capacity to service. And so I go on a slight tangent there because I really think it's important for people listening to this to know that they can do things for themselves. And in my book, I'm giving them the answers. And tell me what works, tell me what doesn't work. I'm really open to feedback from people that read the book. But to your original question, Vidusha, you know, it's as simple as scheduling a meeting with no agenda, getting around a table, and having an honest conversation about what our problems are as a leadership team. But that's it. No complicated PowerPoint deck, no expensive consultant invoice coming, no months and months of planning. Just get around a table and have a conversation with, and here's the thing, no agenda, drop the ego, Don't worry about power or accountability. Don't worry about roles. Don't worry about job titles. Don't worry about you're the highest paid person in the room. You're all equal. And here's the other thing. Have that conversation and focus on how your contributions align to the higher purpose of the organization, and make sure that there is that alignment, because you've got to be on the same page. But if you're not, you can still have healthy conversation and conflict, but just have honest conversations. I mean, I remember a client I had in the legal sector a few years ago. This executive leadership team didn't like one individual, so they ganged up on them. And basically what happened was a breakdown in their functionality. They couldn't function, they couldn't communicate. My role was to help them improve their team dynamics. And we had a 2-day event planned, and within the first 15 minutes, they all attacked this one individual. The CEO said, right, we need to change, we need to take a break, we need to take a review of the agenda. And what we did, our team, we just went back there and said, right, no agenda, the slides are gone, let's just sit down and have a conversation. And we just had, like, you know, in the Aboriginal sector in North America, I've done a lot of work with the Aboriginal communities. We have conversation circles, or we have talking sticks. So when you have the stick, you're talking. And we're listening, not to respond with our viewpoint, but we're listening to understand. Listening is loving. Yeah, we love it. We want to love the environment we work in. We want to love the people that we work with. We want to love their viewpoints and their philosophies, and we can lovingly disagree. So that's the simple thing I would suggest, Vidusha. No fancy preparation needed. If it's a priority, then your organization's leadership team will address it. You won't need to schedule months in advance. You know, I've seen so many leadership teams do that, and they're really just circling the elephant in the room. Guess what? The elephant isn't scary. Bring it into the center of the room. Talk about it. Get curious about it. That's what I'd suggest.
Anton, I'm going to just ask one last question and pass it back to you. I'm sorry, I need to weigh this in, because you know it's very similar to the kind of work we do, Paul, and a lot of people who are listening in will benefit from this. One last question on the same lines, though. See, in order to do that, a lot of organizations do depend on consultants. A lot of organizations do want that outside perspective and support, but organizations don't necessarily have maybe a litmus test of what they should consider in bringing that outside help in. So what would you advise organizations to be the 1, 2, 3 of what you should check for in hiring a consultant in the first place?
Good question. I mean, you have to have a conversation with a consultant around, you know, what are their true objectives? So how quickly do they want to be out of the organization? So, you know, I find that consultants often don't give advice unless they're paid for it. So the first thing is to find a consultant, and then there's always a risk that the client will take the consultant's viewpoints and then do it themselves. Great, because our role as a consultant is to help our clients better themselves. So find a consultant with a philosophy that they want to give, because givers gain, right? Not that they're there because they want the job. So that's the first thing I would suggest. The second thing I would suggest is there's this concept, there's this myth or perception that consultants always know the answer. That's not true. That's just not true. They're not experts in everything. And in fact, look for a consultant who has the integrity and the courage, the bravery to tell you when they don't know an answer. Right? So you're in this, we're not in the world anymore with the consultant process being doctor-patient. So I know what your problems are, prescribe a prescription, and there you go. So look for a consultant that's open about not knowing things. That's what I would suggest as well. And then the third thing, if a consultant comes to you and says, yeah, I've got the answer, this is how you do it, run away from that consultant, because what you need is you need a collaborative approach. Somewhere, you know, work with a consultant as a critical friend and a partner and co-create something. because that is really key to sustainability long after that consultant's left. So be wary of the consultants that just want to bring in a standardized approach, cut and paste the client name, make it your name. Believe me, there are firms out there that I've worked with that do that, and they're not adding value. They're just charging a lot of money, and they're force fitting a solution. So there would be my 3 suggestions, Vidusha.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Right, Anton. Sorry. With the
apologies. If Vidusha didn't ask that question, I would have been worried. But we were silently nodding in. So, Paul, thank you very, very much. For those of us who have joined in, who listened in, tuned in, we were in conversation with Paul McCarthy, all the way from Canada. He is a CEO and Chief Fired Officer, speaker and facilitator, a positive disruptor, and a corporate rebel at Fired Leadership. And his book on Fired Leadership is out, and you will find links to that soon. But this was an hour designed to bring inspiration through the backstories of modern day icons. So Paul, thank you very much for carving out a moment in time from your busy schedule. We truly, truly appreciate your time. What stories, what advices, and looking forward to a collaboration even more. To our audience, thank you for staying tuned, and I hope you enjoyed this segment. We do have another interesting personality lined up for the segment next week, so do watch our social media spaces for the links to join in. If you missed part of this conversation, don't worry, it'll be up on our YouTube channel. Do visit, do subscribe, and hit that notification button to stay updated, and remember to share. Thank you to H1, our technology partners, who've been with us through all our seasons and going strong with season 3. On that note, I bid you a wonderful rest of the day. Stay safe, stay productive.